up, Dr. Ehrman? Thanks for coming, man.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Pleasure to meet you.
Nice meeting you.
What's your background?
My background. How long do you have?
At least 3 hours.
Yeah. Okay. Well, right. So I'm a scholar of the New Testament, early Christianity. I have a PhD from Princeton Theological Seminary in New Testament studies. Mm-hmm. My background, I got into biblical studies because I was a Christian as a teenager, a born-again evangelical Christian, and I went off to a fundamentalist Bible college after high school, and then went off to an evangelical liberal arts college, and I got really interested in studying Greek. The ancient language, Greek is an ancient language, and decided to do graduate work analyzing Greek manuscripts of the New Testament. And so I went to Princeton Theological Seminary, where the world's expert in the analysis of Greek manuscripts worked. And I spent years there working on that and did a master's degree and a PhD. Ended up teaching at Rutgers University for a few years, and I've been at North Carolina Chapel Hill now since 1988.
Oh, wow.
Teaching both undergraduate students and PhD students in early Christianity, New Testament, those kinds of things.
And you mentioned that when you were younger, you had a belief and you were a practicing Christian.
That's right.
And what happened to you? What was your evolution through your belief in Christianity?
Well, when I was raised in the church, I was raised in the Episcopal Church. But then when I was a teenager, mid-teenager, I had a born-again experience and became a very conservative evangelical. And a lot of my faith at that point was built on the idea that the Bible has no mistakes in it, completely inerrant. That was the view taught at the Moody Bible Institute I went to, and also at Wheaton College, where I did finished my undergraduate degree. That view started shifting when I went into graduate school. As I started, I learned Hebrew, and so I was reading the New Testament in Greek and the Old Testament in Hebrew, and I learned French and German, so I could read what modern scholars are saying in these countries, and learned other ancient languages. And the more I studied, the more I realized, in fact, the Bible does have mistakes in it. There are contradictions, there are discrepancies, there are geographical errors, there are problems with the Bible. For a number of years, I became a more of a kind of mainline Protestant type, who had a fairly liberal view of the Bible, a pretty liberal view of social issues and politics and things, but I've still identified with the church. I ended up leaving Christianity maybe about 30 years ago or so, and it wasn't directly related to my scholarship. It was trying to wrestle with the problem of why there's suffering in the world, why there's so much pain and misery if there's a God who's in control. And so I'd spent, I actually taught on it. I've written a book on it. I read a lot of philosophers and theologians and biblical scholars and what regular old people say about why they're suffering. And I just got to a point where I didn't believe it anymore, that there's actually some kind of divine being who's in charge of the world.
What is in your view, the difference between biblical scholars and classical scholars?
They're very closely related, and it depends which kind of biblical scholar you're talking to. Mm-hmm. Most biblical scholars work in a theological context, in divinity schools, in seminaries, and they would be more closely related to theologians than they'd be related to classicists. My training was mainly in that kind of world,
the theological
world, because even my master's degree and my PhD were at Princeton Theological Seminary, which trains Presbyterian ministers. But they were also very interested in serious scholarship. And so it kind of was more kind of crossing the lines. My main professor, Bruce Metzger, was actually, his graduate degrees were in classics. And so I had a bit of that. But once I started teaching, I really shifted more kind of away from anything having to do theology and interpreting the Bible for the church kind of thing, and far more into kind of the classics. And so I have a secondary appointment at UNC Chapel Hill in the classics department, and those are the people I really resonate with, are the classicists.
And in your opinion, which one of the ancient languages is the best ancient language?
The best?
Yeah.
For what?
For anything.
Brownie recipes?
Well, yeah.
They're very different from each other.
Can you explain like the different, what's the difference between like ancient Hebrew and ancient Greek?
Well, they're unrelated. And so Greek is an Indo-European language, like English. And so the grammar of Greek can be taught if somebody knows English grammar, which nobody does anymore, but if they did know English grammar, the grammar of the Greek makes sense in many ways. It doesn't in many other ways because it's an ancient language. Hebrew is a Semitic language. And so it's different in every way. It has a different alphabet. Instead of going from left to right, it goes from right to left. It doesn't have the same ways of doing grammar. And there aren't as many texts in ancient Hebrew as there are in ancient Greek. For Greek, we have thousands and thousands of texts. I mean, going back to Homer and Hesiod and on up, and it just goes forever. For the Bible, for the Hebrew, like biblical Hebrew, the Bible is the only Hebrew Bible, the only sources from its time period that we have.
Right.
And so it's some ways it's harder to analyze Hebrew texts when it comes to things like just words. Like if there's a word that occurs one time in the Hebrew Bible, well, that's the only time the word occurs anywhere in that time period. And so how do you know what it means?
Right, exactly.
And so there are places where you can't really even tell. You know, it's some kind of probably a four-legged animal of some kind, but you don't know what. And so with Greek, it's not that way because, there are Greek words that we aren't really quite sure what they mean, even in the New Testament. But most of the time, the words are used so many times in so many pieces of Greek literature that you can analyze how they're being used in the context.
Exactly.
And you can use the context in order to establish the basic meaning of the word and how it's used variously. And so that's a luxury that you get with Greek, and you also get that with Latin.
Right.
But you don't get it so much with Hebrew or Coptic, which is another language that people might field study, or Syriac. But Greek and Latin, which is what the classicists do, we're really well set with those in comparison.
Yeah, this has been a highly contested topic on this podcast recently when it comes to exactly what you were just talking about, with Greek being everywhere in antiquity and there being no Hebrew outside of like the Dead Sea Scrolls. Like all the ancient texts were, all the ancient Hebrew texts were religious texts. However, Greek, you have legal shit, you have medical stuff, you have all kinds of stuff in Greek, poetry, comedy, everything. But then you have like the Dead Sea Scrolls come about, and we just have the Dead Sea Scroll religious texts, right? And there's no other Hebrew you can find. There's no libraries with any Hebrew in them or anything like that. So
that's basically true, but it's not completely true.
Okay.
There are inscriptions, for example, in Greek. So inscription would be, things written out on stone that are not religious.
In Hebrew?
Yes.
Okay.
And some of the there have been other discoveries of texts that are in Hebrew there aren't very many of them, but like they'll find a cache of letters, for example, written in Hebrew. And so there are some things, but not for the Hebrew Bible period itself. The Dead Sea Scrolls are much later than the Hebrew Bible period dates basically from, it's debated when the first texts were written, 10th century maybe BCE, up to maybe the 2nd century BCE. But the Dead Sea Scrolls are more around the time of Jesus. And so it's a different period. Right.
And so the scholarly consensus, and this is another thing I don't understand that I've heard so much from Bible scholars, is they always say most scholars would agree. Yeah. Why is consensus so important when it comes to this stuff? Why doesn't it, for me, maybe I don't understand this because I didn't come from a university or anything.
Yeah. Well, it's not important as evidence. So that's the first thing to say. And no really good scholar ever uses it as evidence. In other words, the fact that everybody says so doesn't make it so.
Right.
So I guess the reason people say that, and I say it as well, is because if you have a counter opinion, then it needs to be examined. Yeah. And you need to look at it, but you need to realize that there's a reason that everybody thinks the other.
Right.
and these are, when it comes to biblical scholarship, for example, biblical scholarship's been around for 300 years, and lots of things get changed, have been changed, do get changed. But if somebody says that virtually all scholars agree that that whoever wrote Matthew was using the Gospel of Mark, and you say like virtually everybody agrees with that, you say virtually because there will be some exceptions. But the reason that you say that is because most of these people are ones who have actually looked at it seriously and thought about it really hard and seen all of the evidence. And on the basis of all this evidence, they say, it's probably this. And so it's like that in every field.
Yeah. To me, it just feels like a cop-out.
It's a cop-out if you're using it as an argument.
Yes, exactly. Correct.
But nobody uses it. People People object when someone says that. They say, well, that's not an argument. But nobody's using it. They shouldn't be using it as an argument.
Yeah.
If they are using it as an argument, that's stupid.
Yes.
I mean, so the fact that everybody agrees the world is round doesn't mean it's round.
Exactly.
But if you don't think it's round, you really have a burden of proof.
Yes. Correct.
So by saying it's a consensus, you just say, yeah, okay, well, if you think otherwise, let me see your stuff.
Mm-hmm. Right. So one of the folks I had on here recently believes that the Septuagint, it was originally written in Greek and that it was translated into Hebrew. And the reason he said that is because, and I'll try to elucidate this argument the best I possibly can, and you can basically deconstruct it and give me what you think, is that Ancient Greek is a language that had over 1 million unique words. Ancient Hebrew is a language that had maybe 7,000 at best unique words. And he made the argument that you cannot translate from something less technical, Hebrew, to something way more technical, Ancient Greek. He says you translate down, you don't translate up, right? So you don't like, if I was to, the analogy I think of that I try to explain when I talk about this is like, you find a flying saucer in the desert and you want to like reverse engineer it and make your own flying saucer. When you try to reverse engineer that flying saucer, you're not going to make something better than that flying saucer. It's going to be something not as good, right? So that was his main argument with the translation of the Septuagint, meaning like that's why he thought it was an original Greek, and then it was translated into Hebrew after.
And
but
so,
the argument of this is that the Greek that we read in the New Testament or the Old Testament is like Koine Greek. It's like a very unsophisticated Greek compared to like Homer and some of the ancient stuff.
Yeah, well, it's not a very good argument. I don't know who this is, but I mean, it's a very bad argument. You frequently have translations go both ways, translated up, translated down. It's just an empirical fact. English is a much more complicated language than many works that are translated into English, and the Bible gets translated into many languages that are much more simple than Greek. So it goes both ways, and it always goes both ways. Moreover, how does he know there are 7,000 unique words in Hebrew? He's basing that on the fact that we've got these texts that have 7,000 unique words. Okay, these are the only texts we have. People spoke Hebrew. We have no idea what their vocabulary was. For him to say that it had to be only these 7,000 words is a little bit crazy. That's like saying if you get a copy of Time Magazine or something, or it's not even printed anymore, but you get Time Magazine and you say, this is the extent of the English vocabulary. Like in 3,000 years, somebody finds a Time magazine and they categorize all the words, say, okay, those are the only words in English. And so it could not have been translated into a language that has more words because it doesn't work that way. How do you know how many words?
Sure, but just going off evidence, right? We have evidence.
What's his evidence?
Sorry?
What's his evidence?
I'm saying just going off evidence of word counts, unique word counts for those languages. Today, we only have 7,000 unique words for Ancient Greek. We have over 1 million. We only have 7,000 for Ancient Hebrew, and we have 1 million for Ancient Greek.
That's right. That's
maybe
what we have today.
Those are estimates, right? Those are samples, maybe.
No, they're not estimates. He's basing this on account of what the Hebrew words we have. But when people translated the Hebrew into the Greek, they didn't have just those 7,000 words. This is 2,000 years ago.
Okay, but do you think that do you think the scale was similar though? Do you think so? Right now,
it doesn't matter how similar it is because it's not always that you take something more complicated and make it more simple, or that you take something more simple and make it more complicated. Okay. You can absolutely just show time after time after time where that is and how it happens. There are also very good reasons for thinking it did not go from Greek to Hebrew.
Okay, what would be a good example of something that went from of a translation that went from a language that was less complicated to something far more complex?
That went from something less complicated to more complex.
For example, Hebrew to Greek.
Coptic is a very simple language in many ways. You have Coptic. We have ancient Coptic texts. The grammar isn't as difficult. It gets translated into English all the time. English is a far more complicated language.
Okay. Interesting. So, and then my understanding of the Septuagint is, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Septuagint was allegedly written around between 300 and 400 BC?
No.
No. Okay, when was it?
We don't know. For one thing, it's not that early. But what we do know is that
I have some huge news for you folks. AG1 just launched Next Gen with an upgraded vitamin mineral probiotic, and it's clinically backed. Congratulations. AG1's Next Gen is now one of the most clinically backed greens powders. They have gone above and beyond the industry standard for testing and have made a great product even better. The Next Gen formula is more advanced and is clinically shown to help fill common nutrient gaps and gut health. Yes, even in healthy eaters. Next Gen's key ingredients are absorbed quickly and clinically shown to be bioavailable in the body, which means your body is using it. We can get into all the superfood categories it hits, pre and probiotics, and the minerals. But I just like to think of it as I take care of my body so my body can take care of me. After all, how can I feel productive and good if my body can't? Since I've added Next Gen to my morning routine, it has been an absolute game changer and it sets the tone for the rest of my day. And thank you AG1 for sponsoring this episode. Now clinically backed with an advanced formula, this is the perfect time to try AG1 if you haven't yet. I have personally been drinking AG1 for like 2 to 3 years and I'm happy to be partnering with them for this episode. So subscribe today and try the Next Gen of AG1. If you use my link, you'll also get a free bottle of AG D3 plus K2, an AG1 welcome kit, and 5 of the upgraded AG1 travel packs with your first order. So go to drinkag1.com/Danny Jones to get started with AG1's Next Gen and notice the benefits for yourself. That's drinkag1.com/Danny Jones. It's linked below. Now back to the show.
there wasn't a Septuagint. So when people talk about the Septuagint, they're using, when scholars say the Septuagint, they're using a shorthand. There were numerous translations of the Hebrew Bible into Greek that were floating around. And it'd be kind of like today if you go to some developing country and you have missionaries there who are trying to put parts of the New Testament into that language. Okay, so like you have these translators, these conservative missionaries who try, Wycliffe translators, they'll take the Bible and they put it into some language in Africa that hasn't ever been put into English before. Mm-hmm. So you do that so that the people in that language can read it.
Okay.
In the ancient world, after Alexander the Great, so after the 4th century, Jews are spread throughout what was then, at one point was kind of a Greek empire, but then became the empires around the Mediterranean. The educated people read Greek. They didn't read Hebrew.
Right.
They would read Hebrew in Israel, but not in other places. So in different places, the Bible's being translated into Greek. Mm-hmm. Eventually, there was one form of that Greek that came together, and that is what they're calling the Septuagint. But it's a mistake to think it was a one-time event.
Oh, interesting.
And it's people say that because there's a letter called the Letter of Aristeas, which is a Jewish writing that's trying to explain how it happened. And the way it explains it can't possibly be right. I mean, it describes it to this miracle. It says you had these 70 Jewish scholars who were brought together. They were all put in separate rooms. They were all given the assignment to translate it. They all translated it literally word for word the same.
Right.
Which is like, of course, that's crazy. But it does show that they were aware of the fact that it came out of the Hebrew into the Greek. And there, again, this is not, I know you don't like people saying there's not a disputed topic, but there's a reason this is not a disputed topic. I mean, because for one thing, I'll give you one piece of evidence. But I mean, a linguist would just tear that apart, that whole idea apart. One reason it would be torn up, I mean, like a serious linguist who knows both the Semitic languages and the Indo-European languages would tear it apart. Okay. And one of the reasons is because there are many instances where the Greek embodies what are called Semiticisms. The Greek of the Septuagint,
right,
and the Greek of the New Testament. Okay. A Semiticism is when you're taking a grammatical construction that doesn't work in the language that you're translating it into, or is not normally used in the language you're translating it into, but you keep the grammatical construction of the original language for the sake of authenticity or because you don't know quite how to. And so just as an example, if in Hebrew, if you want to say the Holy Spirit, okay, there's no way to say Holy Spirit in Hebrew. The phrase in Hebrew is the Spirit of holiness. The way you make an adjectival attribution in Hebrew is not by using an adjective, but by putting together two nouns and saying of. So the Spirit of holiness means the Holy Spirit, or the way of righteousness means the right way. Okay? So Greek speakers don't do that. They use adjectives. But when you get in biblical Greek, Septuagint and the New Testament, you have these Semiticisms. That shows these are not original Greek compositions.
Okay.
They're being translated from Hebrew with using Semitic forms.
Okay, interesting. But so the original Hebrew we don't have other than the Dead Sea Scrolls. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know what you mean by the original.
Like the original Hebrew. So it was translated into Greek from Hebrew, but that original Hebrew.
We have Hebrew manuscripts, yes.
We have the manuscripts. Okay.
But we don't have the original manuscripts.
We don't have the originals, but they're basically what I'm trying to say is like scholarship tries to date them to a certain spot, but we don't know actually when they are because we don't have them.
I'm not sure what the them is that you're referring to.
The manuscripts.
We don't have we don't have original manuscripts for any writing from the ancient world.
We don't have right. Okay, I see what you're saying.
We don't have the original writings for Euripides, or for Plato, or for Cicero, or for Seneca, or for the book of Isaiah, or for the Gospel of Matthew. We don't have the originals for any of those. The original manuscript. If you mean by that the author sits down and he writes,
Yes.
So I'm Mark and I'm writing my thing, and I write my thing. We don't have that thing he wrote.
Everything that we have is a copy or a rewriting.
Unless it's a personal letter, a correspondence. But in terms of literary texts, they're copies.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a big problem. For the Bible
no, I
and
can
for everything
imagine.
else. It's a huge problem.
Yeah.
That was what my PhD was, because the reason I was interested in analyzing Greek manuscripts is because with the New Testament, we have thousands of Greek manuscripts, but they all disagree with each other because they're all copies, and the scribes made mistakes.
Right.
Or they changed things on purpose. Right. So you got to figure out, well, what did the author say then? If suppose you've got 10 copies of Plato's Republic or something. Okay. And the 10 have they word certain lines differently. Certain sentences are worded differently among these 10 manuscripts. Well, okay, so you got that, but you want to figure out, well, what did Plato write? You got to figure it out. And there's a whole science to doing that.
Oh, wow, that's so interesting. Switching gears a little bit, do you think that Jesus was, you think that Jesus was a real historical person, right?
Yes.
And there are people you've debated that think that he's not.
Yes.
What is the argument to him not being a real historical figure?
Good question. Good argument?
Yeah, what's the best argument you've heard?
Well, if I were arguing that case, I would say, I guess, you're saying it's the best argument is kind of like it's a very low bar.
Right.
It's best.
Understood.
Yeah, okay, what's my best round of golf? It's like, well, okay, it's like, I think what gives some people pause, not so much, okay. What would give people pause is that we don't have any eyewitness accounts of Jesus. Mm-hmm. We have records that are from probably 40 to 60 years later. Our first author who mentions Jesus is the Apostle Paul, and he's writing in the 50s. Jesus died around the year 30. So the first time we have Jesus mentioned in any source is about 20 years after his death.
Do we know when that drawing was done with the donkey head on the cross, the guy with the head of an ass on the cross?
Yeah, that's later. That's in the second or third.
Oh, it's later.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And it's a much debated thing. People say they know what it is, but in fact, it's debated among experts what it actually represents. It's clearly Jesus on the cross with a donkey's head.
Yeah.
And a graffiti next to it. But no, it's much later. So the first reference to Jesus at all our first Christian writing is the book of 1 Thessalonians. Mm-hmm. And it's usually dated to the year 49 or 50. Mm-hmm. Jesus died around the year 30. So it's about 20 years later. So the argument would be that we don't have any eyewitness reports, or we don't have any, things that are really close to the Gospels. The first Gospel is written around the year 70. So that's 40 years later. Mm-hmm. So, so why should we think he really lived? That's kind of the argument. Mm-hmm. It's not a good argument, but it's an argument.
Right. And it is crazy too. I mean, that goes with a lot of historical figures. Like I think Moses is one. Moses wasn't written about until like 1,000 years after he supposedly died.
Yeah, well, 30 years is very different from 1,000 years.
Yes, very different.
So when Paul's writing, there were people alive who knew Jesus.
Right.
And Paul knows some of them.
So it's a much better case for Jesus than Moses.
I mean, Paul knows his brother. Paul personally knew Jesus' brother. So, I mean, if Jesus didn't exist, you'd think his brother would know it. Mm-hmm. That's a joke. Moses is a whole different thing. I mean, so if Moses lived, Moses would have probably lived in the 13th century BCE. Mm-hmm. And it's not clear if we have any sources that mention him for centuries.
Right.
So that's a different thing from somebody talking about him who knows his brother.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, totally. I mean, then the claims when it gets into him being divine and
that's a different story.
Doing all these things and being able to, that's the whole thing. Which I read recently, this fascinating book that really gave me a really good understanding of everything, which was Thomas Payne. I forget the name of his. I think it was The Age of Reason by Thomas Payne.
Yeah, no, it's a classic.
Oh my God, it was such a good book.
Yeah. No, these English deists were really something. They knew a lot, but they didn't know what scholars know today about things like the Bible.
Yeah, and he explains how like the first Christian preachers, how they were, selling Christianity, and then there was the second generation of Christian preachers, then the third generation of Christian preachers, and how the ideas and the motivations and everything gets lost in each generation, and then eventually down the road, it's kind of like the starting point, we don't even remember where this started, but we do know that the preachers are making a living off of this stuff, right?
So, someone like Thomas Paine is a very important figure for like the history of biblical scholarship. He wasn't a biblical scholar himself.
Right.
But these 18th century English deists mainly led to the development of biblical scholarship and the scholarship in early Christianity, especially in Germany, as it turns out, but then also in England and France and eventually in America. If you want to know what was really going on in Christianity, you don't want to rely on what they have to say because they're at the very beginning. It'd be like, if you're going to be studying what evolutionary biologists think today, you definitely have to start with Darwin. But you can't base your views of evolutionary biology on Darwin. You've got to see what we've found since then, because even though Darwin was a genius, there are other geniuses who are standing on his shoulders. Mm-hmm. And so he opened the way for people to learn more and more and more. But it'd be silly to assume that like everybody now agrees with what he was saying then, because they don't. And it's the same with any field. If you look at the giants because they're just absolutely amazing and they make these breakthroughs. But if you want to see what we know now, both on the basis of new discoveries and new ways of analysis and deeper analysis by experts, then you have to go to the modern experts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the most profound things that I took away from that book was that it is the gift of reason that gives man the ability to discover God in the first place, because it's impossible. Like, we didn't come from nothing, right? We go backwards in time. Like, I came from my parents came from their parents. Like, things don't just appear out of thin air. So it is just by us being as intelligent as we are, we have to understand that we can't appear out of thin air. There has to be some sort of higher power, right? Without that gift of reason, we don't have that.
Well, that's what these.
So it's like the human brain. There's something ancient in the human brain through evolution or whatever it is that makes it wired to be dependent on believing in a higher power.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's much debated about why people believe in higher power, and there are a lot going on. But the whole project that the people of the Enlightenment were doing, that Payne and the other people of the Enlightenment were doing, whether historians or philosophers or theologians or biblical scholars, whatever, what they were doing is they're trying to break with the tradition of the church that had been established for hundreds and hundreds of years, where your knowledge came from revelation from God. That's how you know things, because God reveals it to you. And the people with the Enlightenment realize, well, actually, we can figure things out ourselves. And that's when the sciences develop. And it's it's only when someone like Isaac Newton comes along and realizes, even though he's a devout Christian, he says, you can't trust revelation for anything. You've got to do the experiment. And if the experiment comes out to be differently from what you expect it to be because of your beliefs, so much the worse for your beliefs. Once you say that, you start science, and it changes everything. But Payne is all part of that, even though he's not a scientist.
Right. And a lot of those guys around Payne, like the founding fathers, they were Masons, right?
I suppose so. I'm not sure how that affected their, yeah.
Freemasonry was a big thing with the founding fathers.
Yeah. Well, okay.
Yeah, no, it's just interesting. It's just that's an interesting thing.
But the thing about all of these, Payne or anyone else, whatever their other associations, whatever their other religious commitments or non-commitments, whatever their philosophical stance, when they say something, it needs to be evaluated. Yeah. And that's true of everything. Mm-hmm. For me, I'm basically a historian. Mm-hmm. And so when I want to know whether somebody said is true or not, I have to do the analysis. So if he's a Mason, if he's whatever. Today, if somebody is whatever, is a Satan worshiper, is a Mormon, is a Roman Catholic priest, whatever it is, if she or he says something, I look at it and evaluate it. Mm. It's not based on what they happen to be.
Right. We were talking before we started about the ancient Greek, and I was telling you that I had a classical philologist in here who studied ancient drugs, and he said that the word Christ was originally a word for drugs, meaning to apply drugs to the skin or apply drugs to the eyes. And his basic theory is that, Christianity was founded by these pagan drug cults, right? These like ancient drug and sex cults, and Christianity is borrowing from everything that they're doing. And most of the things that they were doing were drugs. And not only drugs, but there was, in the ancient world, it was constant plague, famine, hand-to-hand combat, human and child trafficking was going on everywhere. There was pirates everywhere. And he thinks that a lot of this stuff was borrowed, these pagan cults, a lot of the traditions that they were doing were borrowed by Christianity. And he thinks that, a lot of the words, basically, like, the best way I can describe it is, and this is my understanding of what classics is that there's all this ancient literature that exists out there from antiquity, right? You have the medical stuff, the comedy, whatever, you name it. And then you have the biblical stuff, right? The canon and all the gospels. But then, like, if you veer out of that lane, there's all this other stuff that, like you said earlier, gives you context to what the words are. And Ehrman was saying that in all of these texts, in like Euripides, Galen, Sophocles, the word Christ is being used as a drug term. And he said everywhere. He said it's not just some, I'm not just like cherry picking little things here and there. He said you can find it literally everywhere from when Jesus died and from like 100 years before and 100 years after he was dead. The word Christ is being used as a term to apply drugs. And he even gave me some specific examples, which we can pull up. I don't know if you've heard of them or not, but one of them was, he said that in the book of Revelation 3:18, God says you must Christ your eyes so you may see. And then there's another one where he says that in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus says you can lift up snakes and drink death poisons that won't hurt you. What do you think about this?
Well, I'm sure he probably wanted to sell some books, and he probably succeeded.
Didn't.
He didn't sell books?
He doesn't sell books anymore. He wrote a book, but now he tells everyone to pirate his books.
Yeah, well, that's fine. He wants his views out there then. No, I'd say it's just categorically false, what he's saying. Yeah, it's not true. And so, to somebody, it's difficult to kind of explain to somebody who's not a scholar or an ancient linguist about how it works, but that isn't how it works. The term Christ is not always used as drugs. It's rarely used as drugs. It's used, the word, it comes from a word kreo, which means to anoint. And so, of course, some medications in the ancient world were ointments. Mm-hmm. But it's not everywhere at all. Mm-hmm. The term Christ doesn't occur very much, actually. The term Christos doesn't occur very much. In fact, it's kind of a weird word. It's in Greek, it's just the translation of the Hebrew word Mashiach, which means anointed one. And it's used in the Old Testament for when somebody becomes a king, they have a coronation ceremony. Mm-hmm. Like, today when we have a president being sworn in, there's a ceremony you go through. He puts his hand on the Bible and swears the oath of office. And in ancient Israel, going back to the earliest kings, Saul and David and Solomon, they had...
Did you hear that?
That's vacuum.
Who's vacuuming? Debt does not just show up one day. It builds up little by little. Credit card bills, medical bills, car loans, and suddenly you're feeling stuck. But here's the good news. You're not stuck. You just need a reset. At American Financing, they help homeowners like you every day. They use your home's equity and roll that high-interest debt into one simple, affordable payment. They're saving homeowners an average of $800 a month. No judgment, no pressure, just real solutions that put you back in control. Imagine breathing again, sleeping again, knowing your future is yours to shape. It starts with just one call. It only takes 10 minutes to get started, and there are no upfront fees, so it costs nothing to find out how much you could save. And if you start today, you may be able to delay up to 2 mortgage payments during the process, creating an extra bonus in savings up front. Their mortgage consultants are salary-based, so there's no incentive to put you in a loan that won't work. American Financing is licensed in all 50 states, so there's really no reason not to take advantage of this. Take back your peace of mind with American Financing. Call American Financing today at 888-995-2440. That's 888-995-2440, or go to americanfinancing.net/Jones. NMLS 182334, www.nmlsconsumeraccess.org. Thank you, American Financing, for sponsoring this episode. It is linked below. Now back to the show.
Right. Where do we start back?
We just got erupted by a vacuum. So
I was trying to explain that kreo comes from Mashiach.
Pull up Book of Revelation 3:18.
Well, here, you could do this. You don't need that. You look for interlinear Revelation 3:18 interlinear online. There it is. And the second to last word is the one.
To anoint. What is that word? That's not even kreo, is it?
Well, it is. So the first 2 letters mean in. So it's to anoint on. So kreo is the if you move the cursor, you can see it better. Yeah. So you see that thing looks like an S. Kresai.
Kresai. Okay.
So it's just saying that you anoint the eye salve on your eyes. So an eye salve it's like taking eye drops.
So what is it? What are they talking about there? What's going on there?
He's saying you've got blurry eyes. He's saying you're naked and you've got blurry eyes. Go to the pit before it so we can talk about the whole thing.
Yeah.
I see. This, you know what? It helps for if I just actually look at the passage in my text, because this is one of the in Revelation 3 is one of the is a passage where Christ is writing to one of the 7 churches of Asia Minor, and he's writing to the church in this is 3:18. So he's writing to the church in Laodicea, and he's ticked off at the Christians in Laodicea because they are not fervent enough in their faith. This is Christ. Christ is dictating a letter to the prophet John, who's writing the letter to this church in Laodicea, which is in what's modern Turkey. Okay. And he's ticked off because he says, "You're not hot or cold. I wish you were either hot or cold. Since you're lukewarm, I'll spit you out of my mouth," he says. What? Yeah. It's Revelation 3:16. Yeah, so Christ is being portrayed as being ticked off because people aren't either for him or against him. They're kind of lukewarm Christians. Since you're lukewarm, I'll spit you out of my mouth. So he's threatening to take away their salvation.
Okay.
And so then he says that he counsels you to buy from me gold refined by fire, so that you may be rich. In other words, trust in me instead of trust on your earthly riches. You should try and get white garments to clothe you with instead of those dirty rags of untruth that you're following. And you should keep the shame of your nakedness from being seen, because people can realize that you've got nothing, you're an emperor with no clothes. And you should get salve to anoint your eye so you can see, because you're blinded here. You've blinded yourselves. And so you need some eye drops. So they didn't have eye drops in the ancient world. If you wanted to heal an eye problem, if you had like an irritated eye, they would use salve, S-A-L-V-E, and you spread it on the eye, and so it's like an eye drop.
And what is salve? Do you know what it's like made of?
It's anything. It's just any kind of oily substance that you put on a wound.
Okay.
Yeah. So
there's no relationship to the word Christ.
Well, no, it's the verb. The word Christ comes from the word anointed. The word Christ is not a common word in Greek. Mm-hmm.
It's rare.
Yeah, probably if the Apostle Paul went into some city and said, I wanted to preach you about Christ, they'd have no idea what he's talking about. It wasn't a name, and it wasn't where you would describe anybody. It just meant somebody's been anointed, and they think it's kind of like, somebody just had a workout in the gym, and so they rub olive oil over them afterwards. It's like typical in the ancient world. In gymnasiums, they would, as part you'd have a massage, and they would rub oil on your skin, and that makes you the anointed one. That makes you the Christ.
Really?
Yeah.
They rubbed olive oil on their skin?
Oh yeah, yeah. Because they didn't use soap and things, and they would they'd work up a sweat, and then they had these instruments to kind of take the metal instruments to kind of take off the sweat, and then they'd have oil rubbed on them, and it could be anointed, it could be perfumed oil, and yeah. So
wow,
yeah. So you get a workout. So if somebody's a Christos, they're anointed one, that just means they've had like oil spread on them. So it's got nothing to do with drugs. Of course, drugs also could be. You could have some drugs that are anointed, but this is just a word. It just means being anointed. It doesn't. Nobody thinks drugs.
Right.
And so when this fellow says it's all over the place, well, the word actually is not that common, and the word Christos is definitely not common. And they call him Christos just because in the Hebrew Bible, the king is called the Mashiach. He's the anointed one. And so when you read that in the Greek Bible, he's the Christos. He's the anointed one. It's got nothing to do with him taking drugs or something.
What are you familiar with Euripides?
Yes, I read Euripides this morning for an hour.
Wow.
Yeah, no, I loved Euripides.
So are you familiar with Euripides when he talks about Phaedra?
Yes.
What is going on there?
Wait, the Phaedra? You said Phaedra?
Phaedra. I thought it was pronounced Phaedra.
I'm not sure which one you're talking about, actually. So
I thought that one of the passages or one of the stories in Euripides about Phaedra had talked all about this Christing, and he said that it gave really good context to why it is a drug term.
I wouldn't be able. I'd have to look at it because
Steve, let's look at it. Can you pull it up for us? We'll just cruise the internet.
My latest passion is more the Medea and the Alcestis, and so.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
the Lady Babylon.
Euripides.
So you just casually warm up your mind in the morning by reading
every morning.
Greek.
I get up for my first thing I do in the morning is always is to read Greek, and I've been reading Euripides lately. Yeah, fantastic.
And you read it in the Greek.
Yeah. Oh, Phaedra. Okay,
Phaedra, there you go.
Well, that story. Yeah, so that's kind of an unusual story.
Yeah, try that one.
Okay.
Which one are we looking at? Is that the right one?
Well, this is one of the plays. It's
okay.
Phaedra's in love with her.
Oh, that's it. That is it. Yeah. That's it. That's the one I was thinking of. So, what is this story for people who don't know?
So it's kind of this weird story where she's in love with her stepson, and wants her stepson to sleep with her, and he refuses to do it, and it gets all messed up because like his father finds out, and it's one of these things where people are killing themselves and getting killed over this love thing with Hippolytus and Phaedra.
Okay, so there's no drugs used in this story.
Oh, well, there might be. I haven't read the story for a while, so I don't.
Okay.
But there's.
Steve, what can you find?
Are you talking about his reference?
If you just go to,
he's saying that Christ is used in the context here.
Oh, gosh.
He must mean Creo. He must mean anointing is.
Right. Okay.
Phaedra, yeah.
How do you spell that? C-R...
no, just say anointing.
Anoint.
Or anointing, something like that, or ointment maybe.
So, and then doesn't he say something about lifting snakes and drinking death poisons? About that one,
that's in the Gospel of Mark, but
exactly,
yeah, but that's bogus because
it's at the end, right?
It's the end. It's the end that actually was not originally in Mark.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I mean, he's just making stuff up here. So I mean,
who put that in there?
Us later scribes. You know, as I was telling you, we don't have the original of Mark, and one of the big things they did with Mark is they added 12 verses after Jesus' resurrection. The scribes did, in order to show that Jesus really appeared to his disciples. Because in Mark's gospel, in particular, Jesus is raised from the dead and his tomb is empty. The women are told to go tell the disciples that he's been raised, but they don't tell anybody. And it ends there. They don't tell anybody. So scribes thought that was a bit abrupt. And so they added 12 verses where they go tell the disciples, and Jesus tells them this thing about handling snakes and drinking poison. And
I wonder why they added that.
Well, they added it because it sounds pretty spectacular, and because there are traditions in early Christianity already in the book of Acts of people being bitten by poisonous snakes and it not hurting them. Paul is, and people speaking in other languages. That happens in the book of Acts. And so these Christians were adding this on that Jesus would indicate that that would happen. And there are traditions in early Christianity of people being able to drink poison without it hurting them.
What? So was it specifically snake venoms and snake poisons?
No, not necessarily. It's two different things. You can handle snakes and you can drink poison and it won't hurt you, says Jesus, in those additional verses.
Oh, wow.
But those are the verses.
Interesting.
Those are the verses that the Appalachian snake handlers used to justify their practices. I don't know if you know about the Appalachian snake handlers.
No.
But there are these groups of Christians, these Christian denominations where during their worship services, they pull out the rattlesnakes or whatever, the deadly snakes, and handle them in the church service to show that they really can do this, because that's what Jesus said. But they don't realize that Jesus didn't really say that, and it was added by scribes.
Oh, no.
And sometimes they do get bitten, and they go to the hospital.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So this guy shouldn't be using stuff like that.
Well, it's interesting that they say that in the Gospels it says they could be bit by snakes and it wouldn't affect them or wouldn't hurt them.
It doesn't say that except for in these verses.
In these verses that were added.
That were added later by scribes.
Because Galen talks about, Galen created the Theriac for Marcus Aurelius that had snake venoms and snake viper flesh and all this stuff in there that was like a panacea that was supposed to be able to...
Yeah, sure.
And because like one of the main reasons people were getting killed was all this deadly snakes that were in that part of the world. People were dying from snake bites and stuff like that. So maybe
there was certainly medicine in the ancient world. Absolutely.
Right. Maybe there was some sort of anti-venom or antidote to snake bites that was real.
I don't know of any, but maybe there was. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, yeah. But it doesn't mean that that's what the name Christ means. It's got no relevance. The fact that you've got a verb that means to anoint, you anoint anytime you kind of spread some kind of liquid substance on your body, you're anointing it. But usually it's not to get a high.
It's so crazy to me because like I've been kind of like diving down the rabbit hole of this drug stuff, and me and Steve haven't been able to get any scholar to debate this guy. Like there's so many of them, and we've had a couple of them that'll be like, oh yeah, we'd love to come do the podcast, right? Like we want to be on the podcast, and I'm like, okay, would you mind debating this man? Oh no, sorry, I can't do that. I wouldn't be comfortable doing that. It wouldn't be productive.
It probably wouldn't be productive. I mean, it sounds like he likes ridiculing people.
Yeah, well, it would be...
I never debate people who want to ridicule, who think ridicule is a form of intellectual discourse. I mean, from that clip you showed, I mean, he's just kind of mocking this person who's just actually giving factual information. And so I'm not interested in debating somebody who thinks mockery is a way to engage in intellectual discussion.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that if somebody was confident enough in the classical stuff and they understood, where he was wrong and where the holes were in his arguments, that they would be more than happy to come.
Any classicist would be able to do it. It's just whether they want to deal with somebody like that in a public context. So it's not that they're. I think it'd be a mistake to think that he's come up with something that nobody can refute. I think that is so far from the truth.
Right.
So, I mean, at my university, we have a very strong classics department. These are people who have got international reputations in classics, and any one of them could take them apart.
Yeah, but just like one of like the top classical scholars, Carl Ruck, the guy who wrote Road to Eleusis, he confirms everything this guy says. And I like no other classicist that...
Where does he teach?
He teached at Harvard. I think he's retired now.
What do you mean he confirms everything?
Let's pull up his bio. Who?
What do you mean he's confirmed everything this guy says?
Like he says that this guy, all the stuff about drugs is real.
That they had drugs?
Yeah.
Of course they had drugs.
Or no, that Christ was a drug.
This guy says that? Where does he say that?
Oh, I don't.
There's podcasts where he says it, but this is just his bio right here. This isn't like go up. Where's this? Where's his PhD from?
He thinks that Jesus Christ, he got a PhD.
Harvard University, classical philology.
Yeah, no, this is a serious guy. Yeah,
Okay.
But I mean, he actually says that the name Jesus Christ means Jesus drugs.
No, he corroborates a lot of the things that Ehrman says, and Ehrman's the one who says that Christ is a drug term.
Creo, okay, fine. So
yeah, so that's why you understand that's why
I'll tell you what you do.
I'm so perplexed. That's why I'm just saying.
Well, okay, I'll tell you what you do. Just there are a couple of comprehensive Greek lexicons in existence. The big one is called the Liddell and Scott. It is a massive volume that gives definitions for every Greek word and shows how the Greek word is used in every context.
Right. Okay. What's it called again? Liddell
and Scott. So those are two 19th century British scholars, Liddell, Liddell, and Scott, Scott.
Okay.
Or you could get the Cambridge, there it is. You want the long one, the big one.
Oh, the LSJ. Okay.
There are three versions of it. You want the big one, but there's a new Cambridge dictionary lexicon of Greek that is also comprehensive, and just look up the word Christos and see what it says. It's not hard. I mean, so anybody can do it. So, yeah. In fact, I wonder, it might be online. In fact, you can get this online. You can get their definition online. Let me see. How would you? So if you will search for...
I think it's like lsj.com or something simple like that.
LSJ.
We've been on this website before, I believe, Steve.
I don't remember this.
This is it.
Oh,
we've been on this
we've
website.
been on this. Yeah. Ancient Greek.
Yeah, I see. I guess it's...
It should give you like the actual. There we go.
There it is.
Yeah, just
Stop.
Oh my gosh.
there.
Boom.
There we go. Okay, so we're gonna come back up here.
Yep.
Pasticles.
There you
Boom.
go.
All right.
What do we got?
Search all the texts. Why not? See what you got.
Paste.
It's finding. It says, please be patient, Steve.
I see. I am impatient by nature.
What is this? This isn't even the word.
Christos.
Keep going. I'm not sure why they're doing this.
This website's a little bit slow.
Maybe their traffic is so minimal they bought the cheapest
The hosting
server.
cheapest hosting provider.
Sure. Creo.
Yeah, that's it.
There you go. Dogma.gr. Perseus Tufts. That's what it was.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, that's
Yeah, that's what we've been using.
Oh.
Okay.
All right, here we go. We're making some progress here, folks.
Progress. All right. So it means
To be rubbed on, used as ointment or salve. Anointed. Messiah.
If you go
Euripides.
to
Oh, wow. Look at that. Euripides is right there.
So click on Euripides.
okay. Euripides.
Oh, there's Christos. No, that's the case. Phaedra. Yeah, there it is.
Phaedra?
Yeah, where it says whether it is the anointment or the drug drink.
Drug drink.
Yeah, whether anointment or drug drink. In other words, the poisonous drink or the anointment.
So is it used as a drug term here?
No.
Can we give it credit for being here?
No, because it says I don't
Or
think
drug
so.
drink.
I'd have to read the context, but it looks like it's contrasting the thing that it'd be anointed on or the thing being drunk. Oh,
Okay.
unless the pharmacon. I don't know. I'd have to look at the whole context. Oh, that's why it said 516. This is the one place. It looks like it's saying this is the one place in the Phaedra that it's used and the one place in Euripides that it's used. Whoa, that would be interesting. I don't think that the word Christos actually it'd be worth looking up. I mean, if I had, my resources here, I could look it up. I'd be surprised if the word Christos, like what became the name Christ, occurs before the Hebrew Bible, the Septuagint, before it gets translated into the
You'd be surprised if that happened.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if anybody uses the actual word Christos before the Septuagint.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think Euripides was long before the Septuagint.
He was how much earlier than the Septuagint was he?
Well, he was 5th century BCE, and so he's about 3. It depends if the Septuagint was done around the year 200 BCE then it'd be about 300 years at least before.
Okay, doesn't this say that he uses the word Christ?
No, it's using the word kreo, the verb.
The verb.
I think at least the passage we saw in the Phaedra, that's the verb. It's not the noun. Look, I'll just tell you the short of it is that I think if you get any dictionary, if you ask anybody who does classics for a living, and you just ask them, does kreo does it sometimes refer to drugs, but does it necessarily refer to drugs, or does it usually refer to drugs?
Okay.
They will all tell you the same thing.
No, I know. I talked to all of them. There's only one that tells me that it's drugs, and that's Ehrman.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
then his argument is he says that the only other person that corroborates him who's been dead for a long time is a guy by the name of Julius Africanus.
Well, he's been dead for a long time. Yes, I'd say he's been dead for a long time. He's been dead since the 2nd century.
A little while, huh?
And we actually only have we don't have much of his stuff, and so
Yeah.
I'd be suspicious. What did he say that Julius Africanus
Sorry, he
said?
he said what Julius Africanus said was that the Septuagint was original Greek, or at least parts of it was an original Greek.
How would Julius Africanus know that?
Apparently he was a linguist, or he was a classicist.
He was living 400 years later. He doesn't know. How would he know?
Maybe he read Greek. I don't know.
No, he did read Greek.
Right.
But so what? If somebody today, for the first time, says that the Declaration of Independence was written originally in French, and this is the first time anybody said it, living hundreds of years later, would then, like in 2,000 years, oh yeah, but that person said it.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
It's hundreds of years later by somebody who had no idea.
Right.
And
I see what you're saying.
So, look, all right, I've already explained why the Septuagint is.
No, we're already past that. We're already past that. I made a mistake by saying that.
It applies to the kreo thing.
Right.
It's the same thing. It's the word can be used, of course, for medical application.
Right. Okay. And then when Jesus was arrested in the park at 4 a.m. in the park with the boy.
We're not told what time it was.
We're not? Okay. So
No.
Was it at night, or do we know if it was at night or a day? Do we know when the SWAT team came?
So it's in the evening. He's arrested in the evening. He's had his last supper. He goes out and prays. The figure of the boy in the park is in Mark 14.
Yep.
And it's only in Mark, and it's a strange passage.
Very strange.
Yeah. So it'd be nighttime.
And then the next day, about 8 hours later, roughly around 8 hours, he's crucified. He dies, and he dies early.
Well, it depends which gospel you read. In Mark, he gets crucified at 9 in the morning.
Okay.
In John, he doesn't get crucified until in the afternoon.
Right. And he's crucified. Who were the guys that were crucified on each side of him? What were their charges?
We're not told in the New Testament. There are later legends that deal with them.
Okay.
Where they're actually, yeah. But
so we have no idea what they were crucified for? Or what's the consensus, scholarly consensus?
well, there's not. So people were crucified for a variety of reasons, and I guess I haven't really looked around to see what the consensus would be, but my suspicion is that they also were accused of some kind of insurrection things. Because normally the people who would be crucified tended to be the complete people at the very lowest level of the social scale. So slaves, if slaves were did something nasty, they'd get crucified. But the Romans, the Romans are basically crucifying people that they see as a threat. And so probably Jesus is crucified for calling himself the king of the Jews. In all the Gospels. I mean, it's like the unanimous thing in the Gospels. And so the problem is that the Romans are ruling Israel. And so if he calls himself the king, he's saying that he's the ruler of Israel. And so they don't like that. They crucify people like that. Okay. So it may be that they were also, they're called, the problem is in the Gospels, they're called a word that's often translated robbers. The Greek word is leistes. Leistes, though, in Josephus, the Jewish historian Josephus, uses the term leistes to refer to guerrilla warriors, people who engage in guerrilla warfare. And so if that's what it means...
When was he?
First century.
First.
Yeah. So he talks about people... Yeah. He's our main source for information about first century Judaism. And by the way, it doesn't say much about drugs.
Okay, so going back to some of the stuff about Christianity and some of the early sects of Christianity, one of the things that you've written about a lot is the idea of the virgin birth story, the Immaculate Conception.
Those are different things. The virgin birth refers to Jesus' mother, who conceived as a virgin.
Right.
The Immaculate Conception has to do with how his mother was born. She was born, God did a miracle. Her mother was not a virgin, but the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception is that when Mary was conceived, unlike every other human being, she was conceived without a sin nature.
Oh, okay.
So her mother did not pass on the sin nature to Mary. That became a later doctrine to show why Jesus did not inherit a sin nature from his mother.
Okay.
So the Immaculate Conception isn't about the birth of Jesus. It's about the birth of his mother.
About the birth of his mother.
Yes.
Okay. And where does this idea come from? Where are they getting this?
Where does any theologian come up with their ideas? And so the earliest accounts of Jesus' mother are in a book called it's called the Proto-Gospel of James. And it is a early 2nd century book. And it actually doesn't even mention the Immaculate Conception yet. In this account, it is an account of Mary's birth. And it's a miracle because God gets her pregnant even though she can't get pregnant from her husband. But the strange thing about this story is that it's actually a virgin birth rather than a virginal conception. So a virginal conception is in the New Testament. That's when in Luke and Matthew, she conceives without having sex. But that's different from a virgin birth. A virgin birth is if she gives birth and her hymen hasn't broken in the process of giving birth. The hymen breaks because the baby comes through the birth canal.
Right.
And in the Proto-Gospel of James, a midwife gives her an internal exam. Mary, this is a legend, gives her an internal exam to see whether her hymen is broken. And it has not. And so now it's not just a virginal conception, it's a virginal birth. And as theologians started thinking more about it, they realized she must not have only conceived as a virgin and given birth as a virgin, she must have been a perpetual virgin. And so then you later get the idea of the perpetual virginity, or she never had sex.
Right.
And then after that, you come up with the idea she never even had a sin nature. And so the idea of the Immaculate Conception becomes a doctrine in the 4th and 5th centuries.
That's so bizarre. I didn't know that. Why? So they're saying that how was he born if he didn't come through the birth canal?
It's a miracle.
It's a miracle.
How did he get born?
Was it a
How did he get born
C-section?
from a virgin?
Did they do C-sections back then?
Well, they're called C-sections because they're Caesarean sections. They're
Right.
Caesareans,
Yeah.
named after Julius Caesar.
Oh.
Because his mother was having trouble giving birth, and so they took him out of her womb.
Did she survive?
I don't think so. They usually didn't. In the ancient world, they usually would take the baby instead of the mother.
Oh, Wow, I had no idea it's named after Julius Caesar.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah. See, that's why I'm here.
Yes, that is why you're here. Wow, that's fascinating. That is fascinating.
Right, but you were going to ask me about the virgin birth.
Yes, yeah, I was originally asking you about the virgin birth. So that didn't borrow from any other ideas or any other myths.
I just did a class on this yesterday at Chapel Hill. I had my students read a bunch of Greek and Roman myths about people being miraculously born, because there are a lot. We have them. We have accounts of a god getting a woman pregnant throughout Greek and Roman mythology. In every case, though, the god the woman is not actually a virgin in the Greek and Roman versions. Most of the time, she's just a woman who's had sex a lot, never had kids, or God gets her pregnant, but a god gets her pregnant. But the god always has sex with her. And so there are these fantastic stories. My students thought this was really bizarre, because you have these stories about how Alexander the Great was born. And it turns out that Alexander the Great was born, that he was the son of Zeus. And Zeus came down in the form of a snake and lay with his mother. And his father, Philip, Alexander's father, Philip, was watching through the door and seeing this snake cohabiting with his wife. And then she got pregnant by the snake, who was Zeus, and Alexander the Great was the son of Zeus, because the snake got her pregnant.
Oh my God!
With the snake, yeah, that's very
incestual
and Freudian to boot. And so with the snake figure, so
Freudian, yeah.
Yeah. So, but in any event, so you have these stories of gods getting women pregnant.
Right.
What doesn't happen is gods get that she remains a virgin. So that's different in. They're all different. Like, all the stories are different from each other, right? Getting pregnant from a snake is different being pregnant by a swan, or something.
Right.
But so there are accounts of divine men. They're almost always men, with only one or two exceptions, whose father is a god. But the difference is, in the New Testament, the father who's a god, the woman is still a virgin.
Okay. Interesting.
In other words, there's been no penetration, whereas in the Greek and Roman myths, there's penetration.
Yeah, it seems like the Greeks and these ancient cultures were obsessed with this stuff. They were just obsessed with this, like,
with
nasty.
What, sex?
Yeah, they were obsessed.
Unlike
with
the American culture.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah,
every culture's obsessed with sex.
No, I mean, it seemed way more than us. I mean, it didn't seem like. Let me put it this way.
They're nowhere near as obsessed.
Maybe not more obsessed, but it didn't seem like there was the cultural sanctions around this kind of stuff that there is now.
It depends where you lived.
Oh, okay.
Well, I mean, today, if you sleep with somebody else's spouse, your spouse might leave you. In Israel, if you slept with if the woman slept with her neighbor's husband, they'd kill her. So, which takes it more seriously.
Right.
But in those cultures, a lot of the time, the sanctions for inappropriate sex were connected with property rights, and so already in the Old Testament, the problem with a woman committing adultery is that. So a married woman has sex with another man. The problem is this other man has taken the husband's property rights.
Oh, okay. I see.
And so that's why in the 10 Commandments it says you shall not covet your neighbor's house, his wife, his donkey, his axe, his ox. So the wife is right up there with the donkey as one of the guy's properties. And so it's a property issue, but it still takes it far more seriously than we do.
Which brings me to my question about Jesus and Mary and the greater questions of Mary. What was going on?
The greater questions of
Mary. What was going on the mountain with Jesus and Mary? What was Jesus doing up there?
Do our listeners know what the greater questions of Mary is?
They're about to find out. I saw you wrote about this in your blog, which got me interested in it. We've done it. Actually, during a recent podcast, we brought up your blog and we were showing it to people.
Oh, good.
Some
People
people
should
are
know
aware
about
of
my, the kind of stuff we're talking about is stuff I talk about on my blog all the time.
Yeah.
Like I post 5 times a week on dealing with this kind of stuff.
Big fan of your blog. We'll link that below.
Okay. So, right. The greater questions of Mary. Let me see if I remember this accurately because I haven't looked at this thing in many years. Jesus, does he pull a woman out of his own side and has sex with her? I think that's what it is.
Something like that. From what I understood, was that he brought Mary to the mountain and he said something like, "You have to eat my semen" or something like that. Eat my seed.
Yeah, that's part of it. But she's up there. So Mary Magdalene is up there, and he pulls a woman out of his side and he has sex with her, and then I think they consume his semen. Yeah. And he says something about "do this and you will live." And
pull up Bart's blog, Steve, so we can show the people.
Yeah, pull it so I can see what.
There we go. No. There we go. Look at that. Rated R. Rated X.
Wow.
Punch in on it. There we go.
Okay. Keep going.
The Greater Questions of Mary. Epiphanius claims to have read this.
Yeah, take her to the mountain, prayed, extracted a woman from his side, had sexual intercourse. I got it right. He gathered his semen in his hand, explained this was what we must do to live.
Why was Jesus doing this kind of thing?
Because he could. I don't know. And she was disturbed, and So look. Okay, the reality is that this is quoted in a church father named Epiphanius.
Okay.
Who wrote a multi-volume work called, the English word for it is the medicine chest. Your guy might have liked this book, the medicine chest. So it's called the Greek word is panerion, and it's called the medicine chest because it provides the antidotes for the venom of snakes.
Ooh,
and the venom of snakes are the heretics. Who the heretics
Antichrists
will poison you. No, they're not. Well, they might call them antichrists, but these are like Christian teachers who are teaching false doctrine.
Okay.
So they're teaching false doctrine, and it's like being stung by a snake. It'll kill you. The heresy will kill you. And so he provides the antidotes for this by telling you the truth. The truth will save you from the poison bites of the heretics. That's the idea of this long work.
Okay.
And so one of the groups that he attacks is a group called the Fabianites that he accuses of engaging in wild nocturnal orgies as part of their Christian ritual, like literal orgies at night. And
Fabianites?
Fabianites, P-H-I, Fabianites. I don't know why they're called that. But is a group of Gnostic Christians. And he claims that this is one of their documents, The Greater Questions of Mary.
Okay.
That they have this is a book that they use to justify their crazy ritual practices, which include having random sex. The man, during the worship service, they meet at night, they turn out all the lights, which are on lampstands, torches. They extinguish all the torches. They randomly mix men and women, have sex together. The man pulls out before he orgasms in his hands. They eat the semen together, and then they drink the woman's menstrual blood.
Good Lord.
And this is the body and blood of Christ. And so Epiphanius claims this is happening.
When was this guy writing this?
So he's writing in the end of the 4th Christian century.
Okay.
And he's saying that these groups are doing this stuff. So basically what he's doing is he's trashing people by making stuff up.
So he's making this all up so he can have an excuse to participate in this sick shit himself.
No, he doesn't participate in anything. He's a strict moralist.
Okay, I see.
But he's saying that if you start hanging out with these Gnostic people, these Gnostic Christians, this is the kind of stuff you're going to get into, and it's going to send you straight to hell. And so it's like overly voyeuristic for somebody who's a Puritan. But he's one of these people who's like, he just enjoys telling these kinds of things. He doesn't tell a lot of these kinds of, but he tells some of these things to scare his audiences away from this form of Christianity. There are a lot of scholars, probably the majority of scholars, think that there's some kind of historical root to what he's claiming these people were doing. And I don't think so. I think he's just making this stuff up.
So it's not likely that Jesus actually did that.
Oh, no, there's no way Jesus did this. I'm saying there's no way that these Gnostics actually thought he did it.
There's no way the Gnostics actually thought he did it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
There's no way he did it. And I think there's no way they actually thought he did. Epiphanius is making up slanders against his enemies in order to show how horrible they are.
Oh, wow.
So I think he's making the thing up.
That's interesting. And that's another hard part of this whole field of study and studying these ancient texts is because you're like reading all this stuff, all this historical stuff. And like, just think about the world we live in today with like the news. Like, imagine in 5,000 years from now, they're going back and reading the news today.
Well,
like the news is I read a headline and 90% of the time, there's about 1% of truth in that headline.
Oh, absolutely. No, absolutely. And if in 2,000 years they find, this, that, or the other conspiracy theory is the thing, they'll think, well, that's what everybody thought.
Right, exactly. And then on top of that, people have axes to grind against other people, and
That's right. Yeah, right.
So that's another thing that just to me makes this whole thing so confusing. And in today's day and age with the internet, you have people with different views on the ancient world, and they want to like dedicate their whole life and build a career off arguing with people about what happened thousands of years ago or what people were talking about thousands of years ago.
But see, this is, again, it's why expertise matters.
Yes.
Because experts read these documents in their original languages. They read them in the Greek and the Latin, the Coptic, the Syriac, the Hebrew, whatever. Mm-hmm. They know what these words mean. They understand how it works. They know the history of the period. They know the political history of the period, the economic history of the period, the social history of the period, the cultural history of the period. Mm-hmm. And they study these things. So if somebody comes along and reads Epiphanius, like just a regular old person comes along and reads Epiphanius, they'll just think, well, that's what was happening.
Right.
And experts will be able to explain. It'll take a while to explain. It'll take a while for an expert to explain, but if you listen to them and hear the explanation, you'll understand, oh yeah, that's right. And if you have different experts saying different things, then you can kind of evaluate them. But without the expertise, you just say anything. And there's so much stuff on the internet, it's just people just saying stuff and getting people to believe them because they said it. And okay, fine. But I mean, there are ways to analyze ancients. So I know it sounds confusing, but if you study this stuff for 30 years, you know how to analyze this stuff.
Right. Is there any, I don't know if you know how much you know about Sumerian, but is there any links from Hebrew to Sumerian? Are any of the roots similar?
The Sumerian, no. I think Sumerian's a different language. There's
completely separated, right?
Yeah. Ugaritic is a language that's comparable to Hebrew. So there were cognate Hebrew language. So when I said earlier that the Hebrew Bible, you only have the Hebrew Bible.
Right.
One thing that helps translators is to know the cognate languages from antiquity. So a cognate language is like, suppose you've got Spanish and Portuguese. So if you know Spanish, that Portuguese is pretty close. And, if you've got a word in Portuguese, you don't know what this means, but you know the Spanish word that looks just like it, then you can probably guess, that's probably what it means.
Right.
You can do that with the Hebrew Bible. And so Hebrew Bible translators, when they see this word, this word doesn't occur anywhere else in Hebrew, but you have a similar word that occurs in this language and that language and that language that are cognates, like Ugaritic, then that probably suggests what it is.
Okay. And you can do that with Sumerian and Hebrew. There is some sort of a link there.
No, I think Sumerian's a different language.
Right. Yeah,
different language group. It's got to be a Semitic language.
Right. Yeah, that's what I thought. Because there is a guy who's come up on this he's dead now, but he's come up on this podcast many times, who wrote a book called The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross.
Yeah.
And the premise of his book was about taking the roots of ancient Sumerian into Hebrew. And I don't think you can do that. I think that basically like tears apart his whole hypothesis.
Well, I'm not an ancient. I don't work in ancient Near Eastern linguistics, and so I'm not really,
right. Yeah. Right. But yeah, no. His theory was that the idea of immaculate conception was the same thing as a mushroom, because a mushroom, you don't pollinate. A mushroom comes from mycelium, basically like it's rain comes down on the earth, and the mushroom is born out of the earth.
What's that got to do with Sumerian?
For some reason, he was taking Sumerian roots and applying them to Hebrew words.
But
he was studying the Dead Sea Scrolls for like years. for like, I think he studied the Dead Sea Scrolls for like 50 years.
It's not John Allegro.
John Allegro, yeah.
Okay. Okay, look, the roots of a word, the etymological roots of a word are not indicative of what the word means.
Right.
So we have lots of words in English that don't mean what their roots mean. You can see where they got it, but I mean, for example, if you say lion's teeth, okay, the teeth of lions, you're not referring to the thing that you go out and dig in your garden, because the weed that has a yellow thing coming up, the dandelion.
Right.
Dandelion, not the lion, the lion's teeth. And so the fact that it's called lion's teeth doesn't tell you when your dad tells you go out and dig the dandelions, you don't go around looking for lion's teeth. So the root of a word is not how you establish what the word means.
Right.
So it doesn't matter what the Sumerian root was for this, that, or the other thing.
Right.
It's irrelevant.
Right. Yeah, that combined with the fact that one's a Semitic language and one is from, Near Eastern, I think that kind of like blows that out of the water.
But it wouldn't matter. I mean, for one thing, what does a mushroom and Jesus have to do with either one?
He's claiming that how a mushroom a mushroom doesn't have to be pollinated like any other plant on earth, right? It doesn't have to be, it's not pollinated. So it's like being born of a virgin. That was his connection that he made.
It's got nothing to do with Sumerian or Hebrew.
No, that idea, right.
It's biology.
Right, yeah, that's biology.
Botany.
That's just one of his arguments to support how Jesus Christ was a mushroom. A psychedelic mushroom, may I add.
I know. No, the thing was, he started out as a fine scholar, and he was an expert in the Dead Sea Scrolls. But every now and then you get somebody who's like, very erudite, who takes this weird turn and, wow, okay. So, yeah.
But that gets a lot of people into this stuff too, It's kind of cool because it's like maybe they're crazy, maybe it's outlandish, but it gets a lot of people who would otherwise not be interested in religion. Maybe they're like, "Ooh, maybe he's onto something," and they fall down the rabbit hole.
Well, the problem is that people who are experts in religion don't do a very good job of showing why it's interesting on its own without crazy ideas.
Right.
And so you don't need crazy ideas. I mean, the Da Vinci Code, Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, got a lot of people interested in Mary Magdalene, or in the Council of Nicaea, or how we got the canon of the New Testament, or how Jesus became the Son of God. And everything Dan Brown said in the Da Vinci Code about those things was wrong.
Right.
I mean, I wrote a book on it. I wrote a book on the Da Vinci Code,
I know, yeah.
Going through point by point. And so, yeah, I got people into it, but it got them thinking wrong things. So how good is that?
I think it is good because then they find your book and they realize, oh my God, this shit's wrong. Like me, I got into this stuff from a guy who told me that Christ was a child trafficker who was giving people drugs, and he was a drug cult leader.
Yeah, okay.
And that got me interested in this stuff.
Okay,
and now
fair enough. Okay,
now
fair
I'm here
enough.
in front of you, and I'm figuring out, maybe there's more to this.
Maybe not. Yeah, maybe that isn't how it worked. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, sometimes truth is a lot more boring than.
That's very true.
But sometimes truth is really interesting, and I think scholars generally do not do a good job of showing what's interesting about what they do across the fields. That people become scholars because they're really deeply interested in something, and they're interested in it because there's something that is interesting in it. But they have the hardest time to explain to somebody what's interesting about this.
Right.
And
True.
I think what scholars need to do is figure out how to communicate better, because otherwise you just have these people who come up with these crazy ideas.
And there's another thing about scholarship too, is when you're a part of an institution like that, it's frowned upon to come up with a theory that doesn't fit in with consensus. People are afraid of it.
It's frowned upon if you don't have support for it. If you just spout off some crazy theory, then you get fired.
Well, I mean, in general, would you say in general though that people in scholarship, they typically walk on eggshells when it comes to discussing new ideas or talking coloring outside the lines or anything like that?
I never felt that way. I mean,
Right.
I've been in academia I've been a professor since 1984, and I've never felt that I bound to say one thing or another, except if I say something that doesn't have any support for it. as a historian,
Right.
you know, so like I just can't claim crazy things.
Right.
And, you know, I can't claim that, you know, Constantine, the Emperor Constantine is the one who formulated the Hail Marys, and that he, you know, I don't know, you just say something and like, it's just demonstrably wrong. Well, you can't do that. If you're a historian or if you're a scientist or you're whatever you are, if you make a statement, you've got to be able to back it up with facts. Otherwise, yes, you should walk in eggshells. But I mean, you know, and probably, you know, if you say that every time the word Christ used, it's referring to a drug, that's like, you can't back it up. And you can laugh at people who say you can't back it up, but you can't back it up. And it can be just shown by anybody who can read a dictionary that you can't back it up.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to it, for sure. I think it's complicated, and it's really hard to parse out.
I don't think it's complicated. You look it up in a dictionary. And if you don't, and you don't trust the dictionary, you know, dictionaries can't be trusted either.
Exactly. Well, that's one thing. I had a scholar on here who was telling we were discussing the word lay stace, and we were looking it up on the website we were just on here.
The Perseus.
And it said Perseus Tufts, exactly. And it gave us a couple definitions. I think one of them was robber. One of it, I think robber was like the main one.
Pirate
and robber.
Yeah.
And then this guy goes, oh no, that's the wrong dictionary. He goes, you got to look at this dictionary. It says he's a revolutionary.
Yeah.
Well, so that's problematic. He's problematic if he's saying that, because it means both things in different contexts.
All three things: pirate, robber, and revolutionary.
Yeah.
But the one dictionary didn't say pirate or robber. It only said revolutionary.
Well, it probably wasn't an exhaustive dictionary. That's why you get
it. It was a biblical dictionary.
Of course it was.
Yeah.
Well, that's the problem.
Right, exactly.
So
that's the main problem with it, right?
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, because... Right. So that is a main problem, because you can't trust a biblical dictionary or a dictionary of biblical Greek. You can't trust a dictionary of biblical Greek to understand Greek more broadly, because a dictionary of biblical Greek is kind of like a dictionary of New York Times today's edition English. You know, so it tells you what it means within that. But if you get within that corpus. But if you move outside the corpus of the New Testament into broader Greek, then you want to know what leistes means, because that might affect what it actually means in the New Testament, and it actually does. So it means all of those things. But when I'm saying it's not complicated, is because what you do is you look it up in a comprehensive dictionary, and you can't trust that, but it gives you references. Euripides, Phaedra, you look that up. And you look up all the references and you say, yeah, it's right. It is what it means here. It's got to mean that here. It can't mean something else here, and so if you see a passage that says that, the ship of the lestei was sunk.
Pirates.
Yeah, it's pirates.
Yeah.
If you say the lestes was caught with a loaf of bread, red-handed with a loaf of bread,
right?
Robber.
Or if in Julius Caesar's case, he says the lestes captured me and held me ransom.
So it's the context.
Yeah.
And so it isn't. So that's the problem with saying that the etymology is what tells you the meaning.
Right.
It doesn't.
So if Jesus was in the park with a kid at 4 a.m. or whatever it was in the middle of the night, and the SWAT team pulls up on him and he goes, "Why are you pulling up on me like I'm some lestes?" Like what is he? What is he probably saying here?
Yeah, well, he doesn't. But he doesn't say that in Mark. He says that in John. And so the kid is one story. The lestes is in a different story.
So you're saying he doesn't say, "Why are you guys pulling up on me like I'm a lestes" when the kid's there? That's in two different versions.
Yeah, I think it's in two different versions. I don't think that's in Mark. Hold on, let me check.
Let's find it.
Let's find it, because I
thought it was in Mark.
Maybe it is. Maybe
Steve,
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, gotcha.
I've got Mark. I've got John on my mind right now, because the lestes has a kind of a double meaning in the Gospel of John.
Okay.
And so that's why. Let me see.
Just give me a second, and I just
you don't need.
here.
You don't even need. I will look at it right here.
He's got it. We got two versions. We got the.
Oh yeah, it does usually say it's in Mark.
Mark 15:27.
No, it's in 14. 48.
I hate this freaking.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. It does occur there. But what's it got to do with the kid?
So what is it? So what does it occur? What does the passage say?
Mark 14:48. Jesus answered and said to him, have you come upon me as a lestes with swords in order to arrest me?
Right. So like
Swords
out
and
of all the
clubs to arrest
definitions
me.
we have, obviously he's not saying, why are you pulling up on me like I'm a pirate? Like, why would you be a pirate at 1 a.m.?
Yeah, or a robber. It's talking about being an insurrectionist.
An insurrectionist.
Yeah. Why else would soldiers come after him? It's not for, you don't send a band of soldiers after somebody's stolen a loaf of bread.
Right? Why are you coming up to me like I'm a lestes?
Yeah, that's it.
Like, what am I stealing here? You know, it is weird that he's with the kid.
No, it's not
though.
stealing. It's here. It's not that he's stealing something. It's that they're arresting him for being an insurrectionist.
Right.
And the way you know that is because they arrest him, they put him on trial for being an insurrectionist.
Right.
So that's why they're arresting him.
Right.
Not for being a robber and not for being a pirate. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, but I'm not sure what the kid has to do with that.
Yeah, me neither.
So the kid is only in Mark, but it's a strange story because it's this, they try and grab the guy and he's not
pull his towel
he's
off.
a young man. He's wearing a linen he's wearing like a robe or something, a linen robe. And they grab him and it says he's wearing a linen robe over his nakedness. They grab for him. They
What
only
was the
get
word
his,
for it again? Sindon.
yeah, okay, good enough. And so they grab it, and he runs away buck naked, and that's it. It's Mark 14:62. And so the question is, what in the world is that all about?
Right.
And people have different theories.
Yeah. Ahmed has a theory.
Oh God. So does Morton. so does Morton Smith. Do you know about Morton?
No.
Oh my God. Well, so you should be interested in Morton Smith. So Morton, have you ever heard of the Secret Gospel of Mark?
The Secret I have heard of the Secret Gospel.
Oh my
yeah.
God, you need to do some episodes.
Oh
on
yeah,
this.
please.
Yeah,
Please
Morton
enlighten
Smith, man. I'm telling you, well, he's written a whole book. Oh God, no, it would take 3 hours to describe the Secret Gospel of Mark. But what he argues in the Secret Gospel of Mark, now this guy is a serious guy. Morton Smith, he was like, oh my God, he was so much smarter than anybody else, and he knew it. And oh God, this guy was brilliant. But he had this kind of ultra theory. He taught at Columbia University.
Okay.
And wrote his first dissertation in Hebrew, modern Hebrew, and is a New Testament scholar and scholar of early Christianity, scholar of early Judaism, and he was absolutely flipping brilliant. But he claimed to discover a new gospel, a gospel that was a secret version of Mark that had been published by Mark later than the Mark that we have, that had additions to it. And he wrote 2 big books on this thing. And the reason it caused a big uproar is because he argued that this passage in Mark 14:62 about the young man running away with just a linen cloth over his nakedness is actually referred to in this secret gospel, and that it suggests that this is a young man that Jesus had baptized in the nude, because they baptized people in the nude, and then had spent the night with him, teaching him the mysteries of the kingdom of God.
Jesus.
And,
come on, Jesus. We can do better.
Oh no, he thought he was doing pretty well according to this version. But he has these 2 books. One is called The Secret Gospel of Mark, which is written for lay people, but he wrote a scholarly edition of this whole thing because he claimed to have discovered this manuscript in a monastery in Israel. And it's not clear whether it was a forgery or not. And it's not clear whether he may have forged it.
Interesting.
Yeah,
this
Secret
it?
Gospel. Yeah, there it is. Yeah.
I love this part right here. Some scholars suggest that the letter implies that Jesus was involved in homosexual activity.
Yeah, well, Morton Smith does.
Yeah.
And some people agree with him, and some people think that he's just actually doing this to make waves and to forge something that other scholars accept as authentic.
Sure. Well, I mean, it is. I can imagine how that's frowned upon by most people.
Yeah, most people didn't like that,
especially if they're theological scholars.
But the thing is, you could, and accept the secret gospel and not accept his interpretation of it. Because the gospel itself doesn't say that Jesus was engaged in homosexual activities.
Right, exactly.
And so it's the interpretation that people objected to. But now there's big questions about whether it's an authentic writing or not, if it is, when it was written, and so forth.
So my introduction into this, Amens, you're probably going to laugh me out of the room after I tell you this. His theory, the drug theory of what's happening in the park is Jesus was participating in the mystery in the upper room prior to when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane. Mm-hmm. And he was drinking viper venom, the death inducer. So his idea of how people participated in the mystery was they would ingest the viper venom, come up to the edge of death to where they're about to die, and then they would take the antidote. And according to Galen, the way they came up with the antidotes to things like viper venoms was sort of like antibody therapy, like ancient antibody therapy. So they would take young people who had way better, more robust immune systems. They would slowly give them an introduction to viper venom with like a small cut in the skin where they'd impregnate the bandage with venom, wrap the cut in the skin. So they would do a slow introduction of the venom. So it wasn't enough to kill them, but their body would fight it off and create antibodies. So then they would use the young person's bodily fluids as an antidote for the older people who got high on the viper venom. So you get high on the venom and then you take the body fluid so you don't die, right? So it would save you. It'd be the antidote. And what Amen says was the Antichrist, because the drug was the Christ. The drug was the Christ. Sorry. The antidote was the Antichrist.
All right.
Okay, so the kid had the bandage on him because he was the antidote, because Jesus was tripping on viper venom in the park, right? The kid was there because Jesus needed that kid's bodily fluids so he wouldn't die from the viper venom. It was his antidote, so he would survive that psychedelic trip that he was on. The kid ran away. Jesus was crucified. When he's on the cross, he's screaming out, he's thirsty, I'm thirsty. They tried to give him the sponge. His followers tried to give him the sponge, which had the antidote on it, the antidoton for the dipsas, according to Nonus, the antidote to the horned North African viper. And Jesus said no, he refused to take it, and he died early because he refused to take the antidote. And that's the explanation to why Jesus died early and why he was screaming and why he was so thirsty on the cross, is because when he was arrested in that park, the boy was his antidote, and the boy ran away, so he didn't get his antidote. That's a fun one, isn't it?
Well, yes, I suppose it is fun. So, yeah, well, I think that, every theory needs to be considered seriously.
Yes, I guess.
And one needs to evaluate probabilities.
Sure.
And for openers, in the text, it's clearly a Passover meal. In all of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it's the Passover meal. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't say anything about Jesus drinking venom, obviously. Mm-hmm. What he does is he takes so at the Passover meal, we know what foods were eaten at a Passover meal, included unleavened bread and several cups of wine. And he takes the bread and breaks it and says, "This is my body." And he takes the cup of wine and says, "This is the new covenant in my blood." So normally at Passover, they weren't drinking venom. We have no record of anybody drinking venom at Passover. We have many, many, many references to people drinking wine. And it's portrayed as wine. It's likened to his blood. Normally it's thought that's because it's red wine that looks like his blood. I don't think venom normally looks like blood. Right. As to the young boy, it doesn't say anything about that. And so it's just, you can make things up. And it sounds interesting, and people will say, "Oh, that sounds interesting," but what's the evidence of it?
Right.
And what's the evidence that he's drinking venom?
Yeah.
And what is it?
This is, like I said, it's fascinating, and it would be great if I could get him in the room with a scholar that has the capacity of the Greek, who could combat him? Because most Bible scholars, they don't understand the Greek to the level of a classical philologist. So
well, they understand it well enough to refute that one. I mean,
okay.
How hard is it? I mean, blood is haima. Is that used for venom? So I think you don't need I mean, look, there are a lot of biblical scholars who are very fine linguists. I mean, superb.
Aren't most biblical scholars, though, like this is the contradiction of a Bible scholar, is that most of them, and correct me if I'm wrong, they subscribe to Christianity. So they're a scholar of their own belief.
Yeah, but Christianity doesn't mean fundamentalist. When I went to Princeton Theological Seminary, I was very conservative at the time. But when I went there, all of my professors believed there are contradictions in the Bible, there are historical mistakes, there are discrepancies all over the map. There are things that Jesus said he didn't really say. Just like they all agreed to that. And so it isn't like they're a bunch of fundamentalists just going around trying pounding the Bible. These were very serious scholars who are, and so I think it's unfair to say that they can't be trusted because they have some religious beliefs. You have to look at the scholarship for the scholarship. Plus, there's plenty of us who aren't religious at all, who study this stuff, who think that sort of thing it's just like, sorry, but I mean, no.
Okay.
I mean, if I come up with some account of, Joe Biden being taken out of this world by a Martian spaceship, and that's why we don't see him anymore. I can certainly say that, and there'll be people who believe me. But, there'd be ways to kind of check to see if it's right. And the problem in the world right now is people don't check to see if anything's right. They don't. Yeah. They can't. People won't even. If they hear something, they assume it's a fact. And of course, politically, that's a big problem. Yeah. Because on both sides, people just assume things are facts without bothering to look into them.
Right. It's tribalism.
But in my field, there are ways to check out facts. So people should do that.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because most people, most religious, godly people, they don't look that deep into this stuff because it gets messy when you really get deep into it. You know what I mean? It's the general idea of it. Like we were talking about Thomas Payne earlier, like the general idea of believing a higher power and the idea of Jesus. It's like a good moral framework for society, right? But when you really that's the whole point of, what your history is and the stuff that you've looked into is like when you start to excavate all these texts of ancient history and the Gospels and all that thing, you'll find out that it's really messy and it's not that simple. But that's like, you can't discount the moral value and the structural framework that religion provides for society.
Well, a lot of people do, and my view of it is that religion can be used for good or bad, and there are horrible things that get done in the name of religion, obviously, but there are also good things that get done in the name of religion. Sure, and so that's another complication. So I don't think that you can, I just don't think the way people think today, it's so binary. It's like this or that, and it's few things really are just this or that. Yeah. And just even, I'm an atheist, but I'm a New Testament scholar. And when I say something positive about Christianity, I have some atheists who just come down my throat. How can you possibly say anything good about Christianity?
Right.
Well, why not?
Right.
It has done good. And, and if I say anything negative, then the Christians, the fundamentalists get down my throat.
Right. So. Yeah. That's an unfortunate part of human nature.
Yeah.
What's going on with the book of Job?
Not to come out of left field, but what's up with Job? Job is another book that people almost always misunderstand. So it depends what you mean by it.
So I learned about the book of Job reading about Thomas Payne, and he basically explains that it's completely disconnected from anything else in the Bible.
Well, it depends what you mean. It's written in Hebrew, so it's connected with other things. Job, interesting, it's in the Hebrew Bible, but Job is not an Israelite. So the book of, I'll tell you the reason the book of Job is complicated, and it's for a reason that Thomas Payne would not have known.
Isn't it the first book that mentions Satan?
Kind of, but that's not the complication.
Okay.
It does. So there is a figure in there called Hasatan, which in Hebrew means the adversary. But he's not the devil. He's not like this evil force that's out that we think of today, like the head of the demons. He's not that. He's actually one of God's council members. God has a group of like angelic beings around him that he asks advice for in a number of passages in the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. So scholars could just call it the divine council. And the Satan, the adversary, is one of those figures. And so later on, hundreds of years later, Jews started developing the idea that this adversary was actually an enemy of God, the devil. That starts up about 200 years before Jesus.
Okay.
But it's long after the book of Job was written. And Job, he's one of the, he plays devil's advocate. He brings up the opposite side of what God says, just as a kind of to challenge him, and then God responds, kind of thing. The problem with Job is that people have, the reason they don't understand it is because it begins 2 chapters that are kind of a short story about this guy Job, who's very righteous, and the Satan convinces God to take everything away from him to see if he'll still be righteous. Because the guy's filthy rich, richest guy on the planet, fantastic family, big family, tons of cattle and sheep and camels and things. He's like filthy rich, but he's very pious. And the Satan figure says he's only pious because of all the stuff you're giving him here. Take away the stuff, and then he'll curse you to your face. And so that's what happens. And so God says, no, he won't. Satan says, yes, he will. So God said, okay, do it. And so Satan does it. And then, so it goes like that. But then, so that's the first 2 chapters. But then the book is like 40 chapters long. And almost all of it is not about that. Almost all of it is about Job having a conversation with his 3 so-called friends who say that the reason he's suffering so much is because God's punishing him. And Job keeps saying, I haven't done anything wrong. He says, no, God's punishing you. And it goes on like this for like 37 chapters. And then it gets back to the short story. So the back and forth of friends is all in poetry, and the beginning end is a prose short story. And scholars, long after Payne, came to realize these are actually 2 different stories that have been put together. The beginning and the end is about the patient Job who suffers even though he's righteous, and God rewards at the end. And in the middle, Job is not patient. God doesn't want anything to do with him. The friends are not friends, they're enemies. And so they're 2 different things that have been spliced together. So the whole thing as a whole doesn't make sense because you got these 2 accounts put together.
Oh, okay. And then Job also mentions a lot of things like that, like about astronomy and all kinds of astrological things that the Jews didn't know about necessarily. That's at least how Thomas Payne explained it. A lot of scientific stuff. It's not true?
No, it's not true. No. At the end, God, Job, at the end of the poetry, where Job's saying he's completely innocent, the friend's saying you're guilty. Mm-hmm. Job says, look, if God will just show up, I'll be able to make my case. And God shows up and just drives him into the ground, just squishes him under his thumb, and just blasts away because basically God is the Almighty and you're a peon. What are you talking to me about me for? Mm-hmm. And so, but in that, God says, where were you when I, created the foundations of the earth? Where were you? And he starts talking about the stars and, all the stuff that he's created. And even in the other things in the book, occasionally there will be astronomical references, but they aren't things that were unknown to ancient Israelites at all.
Okay.
Ancient Israelites were just as interested in astronomy as anyone else.
Yeah, I heard that there's there was zodiacs and the temples in Tel Megiddo.
Oh yeah, but that's centuries later.
Okay,
that's many centuries later. Yeah, that's right. No, you do have zodiacs in some, not in temples, but in synagogues.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's what I meant to say. Yeah. In the synagogues, which is interesting.
Yeah. There's all sorts of stuff that archaeology has told us that for centuries people didn't realize, because it was always said that Jews could not have pictorial art, for example, that you couldn't have pictures of humans because that's like an idol or something, and you can't have that. Right. And that's just not true. And now they've dug up synagogues that have pictorial art in them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Dug up a synagogue that appears to have a picture of a mosaic of Alexander the Great. In the synagogue.
Wow. Did you see there was a there was a recent discovery that was made in actually the University of Tampa, which is close to here. They found a mug from the god Bes. It's an Egyptian god mug.
Huh.
That had they like somehow did a study on it, and they found out like they figured out the cocktail that they were using in this mug, and it like, can you pull it up, Steve?
Oh no, I don't know about this.
Oh yeah,
There it is.
there you go.
Psychotropic drugs.
Yeah,
I'm
look
telling
at
you,
that.
man, it's everywhere.
Look at this. Ritual drug war. When did they date this to?
Oh geez, let's see here.
Ancient Egyptian mug from the god Bes ingested mixed psychoactive drugs, human blood, and other bodily fluids in mysterious ceremonies, according to a new paper. 15 authors of the paper reported in the Research Square prior to the academic peer review. Come from institutions including University of South Florida. When did they say this was?
Oh, okay,
here we go.
16th century.
Oh, wow.
BCE.
Holy crap.
Yeah. Well, okay. Vessels of this shape are from the 16th to the 5th century. This particular one dates to 3rd century. Interesting. Oh, somewhere between 3rd century BCE and 3rd century. Great. Yeah, interesting.
So what did it say? Scholars have speculated that they may have been used to hold perfume or holy water, wine, or beer. God.
Cult members may have drunk from them.
Oh my God! But the residue, the residue of their contents has rarely been studied.
Oh, I see.
No
They're saying
other-
generally that's the case. Have they studied this one?
There was semen found in this one. I'm
What?
pretty sure.
There was not.
Stop it!
The Fibulites.
I swear it was.
No,
No, you're
I
right.
swear.
no, Steve.
I want to say
A lot of stuff made up around here.
Keep
Bodily
scrolling.
Bodily fluids, man.
Go back down. See what it said. Type in bodily fluids. See what it says. What bodily fluids it was?
bodily
Probably blood.
fluids.
Keep going. Go to the next one. Such as oral, vaginal mucus
vaginal.
and breast milk.
Yeah.
And human blood.
Wait, okay, by analyzing. Wait, the authors found, these include, and plant, they also found human blood. That's fantastic. Oh my God.
Oral or vaginal mucus and breast milk and the blue water lily. Holy crap.
That they mix with sesame seeds. You know, that's the best way to consume vaginal mucus, and is with sesame seeds. They probably have a recipe. Probably on the bottom of this cup, you'll find a recipe for. That's great.
God, that's crazy, man.
Yeah, no, that's amazing stuff. Wow.
And Bes who was Bes? He was a guardian figure until he became a Roman era divine being. Okay.
Oh shit, Bes, deity Bes.
Roman era divine being that provided protection from danger and averted harm.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Antiquity was a fun place to be.
Yeah, I tell you, and you know they still find stuff, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's really quite amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's insane. We had I had a guy in here who brought in he's a collector of, he buys stuff on the antiquities markets, and he buys these granite vases.
Yeah.
And I guess they were found in like the Bent Pyramid or one of the pyramids in Egypt, and they were like all just down at the bottom of them. And he paid just like hundreds of thousands each per one. He says like a few dozen of these vases he's purchased. And I guess Egyptology dates them to being around the time of like 2000, maybe 2500 BC, roughly, when they were created. And the way that the consensus of how they were shaping these things were just based on hieroglyphs and depictions that are written or like drawn on cave art or whatever, is that they like were hammering and chiseling these things with like pounding stones and copper chisels. That's the tools that they had. But then he took one of his vases to an aerospace company, like a big aerospace company in like the Midwest, and they put it under a light scanner, and they found out that this granite vase, which is one of like the hardest stones that we have, is perfectly symmetrical from top to bottom within the deviation of a human hair.
Interesting.
Like it was almost spun on, like even more symmetrical than you find like a piece of clay that's spun on a wheel.
Interesting. Yeah.
and it was made 2,000 years ago. And it's like,
Yeah.
so basically if you wanted to recreate, if our culture wanted to recreate it today, you would have to do it on like a CNC machine or something like that, make it on a computer.
No, I know some of the technology, they don't know a lot about how the technology worked. I mean, there are classicists, who work on ancient technology. Like, this is what they do.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like, how do you build a temple? Like, how do you have this this column that goes up, 40
Right.
feet and each of the drums of the column weighs, what kind of, how do you do that? Mm-hmm. And so there are people who do that kind of thing. But, there's also a lot of prehistoric stuff, right? That, like the rock circles, like the Stonehenge things.
Yeah.
There's some amazing finds that where you'll have like you'll have two stone circles like that on different continents that are exactly the same size to the millimeter. What? How?
That's so wild.
Yeah, I mean, it's stuff, and it's like the ancient world is amazing, and it's like, yeah,
Yeah, it's so mysterious how some of this stuff was able to be created. You like root beer?
we'll see.
That's root beer flavor. That's great, delicious stuff. White Rabbit, shout out. It's just so mysterious, and it's so interesting, and it gets people, and it does that phenomenon where people like to fill in the gaps with their minds of what it was. Like, was it God or was it aliens? You know what I mean? Like
those are the two choices.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, those are our choices these days. Yeah.
Like
It's a miracle,
or maybe we had human beings had technology that was more sophisticated than we have today, right?
In some ways they did, and the problem is that so much of it is lost. But they certainly did in some ways, but they didn't have electricity. And
right.
and they didn't have, they didn't have ways of creating engines the way we do. And so they didn't have, they didn't know anything about internal combustion or anything like that.
Mm.
So, but what they did was absolutely spectacular. But they also had a lot of people power.
Yes,
and so,
right.
That's, yeah.
Have you heard of the younger dryas hypothesis?
Don't know that I have.
Basically, it's the idea that around, I want to say it was 16,500 years ago, roughly around then, during the end of the Pleistocene, that there was some sort of either a cosmic comet impact or like a solar flare ejection that happened that melted the end of the ice age, right? Like if comets hit around the Earth, like we went through some sort of like asteroid belt or something like that, or meteor stream, that comets hit the Earth, melted all the ice, flooded the Earth, and basically wiped out like 75% of civilization, and it kind of like reset us, right? So like there's people that like to connect that idea with the fact that maybe human beings had some sort of advanced ancient technology that was erased from the face of the earth when one of these cataclysms happened, because there's archaeological evidence that, like with like the black mat layer and other things, that there was some sort of a cosmic event that happened on Earth that ended the ice age and would have wiped out a lot of people and potentially some sort of technology that we had, and that civilization was reset. And maybe this could be an explanation for some of the flood myths as well.
Yeah,
because the flood myths are everywhere, right? Like,
well, they are, but they're also always around places where there's major water supplies.
Right. Right.
So
the Nile.
That all flood.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, if I wanted to know about that, I'd probably talk to a high-level university geologist.
Mm-hmm.
Probably wouldn't go online to find out. So that's the problem.
You wouldn't go on TikTok?
Well, not anymore, apparently.
Oh yeah, they're getting rid of it.
As of yesterday, apparently, yeah.
Yeah, what happened? Someone bought it? Did Elon Musk buy it or something? Or he's trying to buy it?
Well, the Supreme Court, yeah, I forget. Anyway, who cares? Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, Bart, thank you so much for coming, man. This has been a really fun conversation.
My pleasure. Yeah.
Tell people where they can find your work, where they can find your blog, all that fun stuff.
So there are a couple things. One is my blog. So my blog's this unusual thing because thousands of people have blogs, but my blog, it's on New Testament, early Christianity, everything cognate to it. The ancient Roman world, the ancient Judaism, early Christianity, up through Constantine and beyond. I post 5 times a day. Five times a week. Five times a week.
Oh, okay. You are human.
1,200 to 1,400 words. I've done it for almost 13 years now. And so it's like every day. And I answer questions. Every question I get, I answer. So the reason I do this is not for my jollies. It's both to spread knowledge about my field, but it's also to raise money for charity. So there's a small membership fee that people pay. It's not big. Comes out to like the cheapest level is like $10 a week kind of thing. It's like $24.95 for a year. But there are higher levels where there are more perks. But I give all of the money to charity. Wow. And so I don't keep a dime myself, and I do separate fundraising to pay for our expenses so that every penny goes into the charities, which are all dealing with hunger and homelessness issues. Last year, 2024, we raised $575,000.
What?
Yeah.
Holy smokes.
So people just by joining and getting all these perks, like my posts, and at higher levels, there's audio versions of they can get, and I do live Q&As, and I do, at the higher levels, I do webinars, periodic webinars with people in the higher groups. So people should just look up. So it's ehrmanblog.org.
Okay.
And they can look it up. The other thing, about 3 years ago, we started a company that produces online courses on all topics. We started out doing mainly biblical studies, which is what we still mainly do. But and I started out doing the courses myself on, I'll do something on the Gospel of Mark, like 8 lectures on the Gospel of Mark on a weekend. Or we'll have short, like one-off lectures. Like I did a thing on the dark side of Christmas, where I did 2 lectures talking about like the really parts that don't look good about what's happening in the Christmas story. Like, why does Herod have to kill all the babies so that Jesus can be born? That kind of thing. And so we have these courses. They can find that on BartEhrman.com. I've got a thing on courses. But we've also started this thing connected with it, where we do semester-long courses taught by high-level university professors.
Oh, wow.
We have one going on now on an introduction to the New Testament by a very fine New Testament scholar who's a terrific teacher, and it meets twice a week, like a university course, 50-minute lectures followed by Q&A each time with suggested readings people could do, quizzes if they want to take quizzes, and so it's like getting our first course was by Duke University professor Mark Goodacre. You get a Duke University course online for this thing. So this one is not for charity. It's a business we have going, but that's called the Biblical Studies Academy.
Okay.
So if people just look up Biblical Studies Academy, it's like a streaming service. They pay a monthly fee, and they can get, if they pay the monthly fee, they get all the courses that are already available. They can go to these university level courses. They have chat groups, they have discussion groups, they have book reading groups, movie watching groups. It's this community for people who are not, a lot of people are interested in the Bible, but they don't have anybody to talk to about it, like academically interested,
right?
As opposed to being like in the church interested sense. And they just want to talk about stuff that they're interested in. They don't have anybody. This is a forum for them to do it. So we just started a Biblical Studies Academy, and they could look it up.
Beautiful. Yeah. That's really cool. Yeah. Making this stuff accessible to just anyone online who wants to learn about it.
Serious scholarship made accessible and interesting to people who aren't scholars.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, we'll link it all below so people can check it out.
That's great.
And thanks again. I appreciate your time.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Good night, everybody.